French author Blaise de Vigenère, on whom you have basic information in the Book of Abstracts, dies in 1596. And we know that there are his two posthumously published translations. The first is the Apollonius of Tyana, a Greek text by Philostratus the Older, dating back to the 1st century AD. Since it is commonly known that the importance which within the framework of Neo-Pythagorean movement of the late antiquity and the early modern era exerts the idealized picture of the personality of Apollonius of Tyana, whose teachings and miracles reminded those of Christ himself, it's nothing to be surprised at the interest in Neo-Pythagoreanism of a Kabbalist like Vigenère. His another posthumous publication is the Essay on Military Art by the Greek writer Onosander. Although this work was by then known in its rendering into Latin and French, Vigenère nevertheless undertakes a new translation so that in his version of it, it would eventually become a manual for modern warfare. Thus, for example, the readers are provided with information about the production of gunpowder, the weights of bullets, the number of horses required for transporting a cannon, and so on. As in his other translations, Vigenère involves classical writers in order to, so to say, serve the modern users of his reading matter. Moreover, the translations fill the Vigenère's annotations and digressions, which are crammed with translated passages in verse and prose from all sorts of classical writers, starting from Homer and Hesiod through Herodotus, Orphic hymns, Pindar, Polybius, and Catullus, to Pliny and Ovid. It is important to notice that Vigenère, while doing so, belongs to that kind of the 16th century modernists who pled against the too slavish imitation of classical writers. Vigenère says that it is reasonable attaching the importance to the antiquity, but that it doesn't mean that nothing except the classical poets is not to be learned, praised, or approved. In some other texts, that is, translations of the period, which deal with the subject that obsessed the minds of the intellectuals, and we are talking about the threat for the Christian world by the Ottomans, constantly looming over from the east during the 16th century. The authorial commentaries make appearances in which the Jewish origin of numerous aspects of the Islamic religion runs through. By way of illustration, a recurring theme is the striving for the interconnecting of all monotheistic religions, which manifests itself through the intentions for the launching of a new crusade, as well as through undertaking the publication of editions of somewhat daring contents, as was the edition of the Quran or the first translation of the Quran. That kind of approach will be continued and expanded by Vigenère himself. Not only did the crusade ideology connected the like authors as Vigenère, but it also influenced his religious and prophetic aspirations, as is evident by later Vigenère's translations from Italian, the liberated Jerusalem by Torquato Tasso, and Old French, the Villard-Douin's history of the conquest of Constantinople by the Crusaders. In this way is formed and became dominant a peculiar revelation of the Crusaders' eschatology in the contemporary intellectual circles. Within the obsession of regrouping and unification that distinguishes the spirit of counter-reformation, the Crusaders' campaign towards Jerusalem, that is unity, which Tasso took to be the main subject of his epic, did not leave indifferent Vigenère too, since the theological and mystical spirit stand in the basis of his opus, which makes it one of the most rich and fascinating encyclopedias of sacred and secular knowledge of its time. In de Vigenère's Jerusalem, Liberated Jerusalem, the point at issue is actually a translation in the service of the French royal authority, which he, evoking the First Crusade, legitimizes as a leader in the holy campaign toward God and the victory of one over the multitude. The connection between myth and contemporary history, which the translator accentuates in this matter, enables him also to adopt the eschatological utopia of Tasso's poem and its mythical and historical, that is, allegorical aspects. There can be found in the Tasso's Liberated Jerusalem esoterical aspects of culture and philosophy, as if they were made to fascinate a follower of alchemy such as Vigenère. In other words, he certainly found subtle analogies in the Liberated Jerusalem between the world this poem reflects and the speculations of the Italian humanists of the Neoplatonic provenance, Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola. It is true also that Tasso's poetry contains an essentially visionary component that, like some Vigenère's original pieces of writing, links the esoterical experience with practical counsels for the behavior in the intellectual activities. The manneristic aesthetic and the metaphysics of light, originating from the work of Pseudo Dionysius the Areopagite, gives their contribution also to the very style of the Vigenère's translational poetry. Regarding the translation of another work, the description of paintings by the Greek writer Philostratus the Younger, published in French under the title of the Pictures or Tables of the Plane Painting, it is obvious that the epistemological foundation of painting could only proceed against the background of relation between the word and the picture. Since Vigenère, as a follower of the Kabbala, believed in such a genealogy of designation which the letters brought closer to symbols, hieroglyphs, and pictures, he couldn't deny the existence of a common root of the visual arts and the interpretation of nature of the visible world. The same is evident also in his original treatise under the title On the Figures, that is, Codes, where it is obvious that he and the alike minds searched for the essence of every semantic form precisely in the mythological memory. Likewise, it is important to note that Vigenère considers the dissociation of mental and material image as wrong. He believes in conceivability of visual forms, and he regards it as a necessary expression of the cognitive function of human spirit. That can be considered as a demystification of the power that words have to visualize things, inasmuch as Vigenère alike becomes aware that verbal images cannot fully replace the visual ones. Therefore, Vigenère can be seen as a pioneer of a new age in this respect. In his posthumously published essay under the title On Fire and Salt, Vigenère reminds his readers that everything that exists is divided in three so-called worlds, and that every world of these has its proper science, which is double. One is common and ordinary, and the other mystical and secret. The intellectual, that is supernatural world, has its science, has for its science our, that is Christian theology and the Kabbalah. The celestial world has astrology and magic, and the elementary, that is material world, has physiology and alchemy. Likewise, in his essay on codes, or secret manners of writing, which is the precise title of the work, published in 1586, Vigenère explains that these three worlds that man regarded as microcosm correspond with the next three parts. First, intellect, second, soul, and third, body, since they are represented primarily by the three letters which constitute the word for Adam in the Jewish alphabet. These are Aleph, the letter designating the intellectual world, Dalet, the celestial, and Mem, the material. To the alchemy as an art of fire, Vigenère attributes a very special importance. This lower world, and this was precisely what the classical poets professed through myths and fairy tales according to him. In one of the commentaries on the already mentioned translation of Philostratus' pictures, taking as an example the myth of Prometheus from the same book, he claims that the ancients taught about the strength, the very alchemy as the destroying power of fire, and thereby about its extraordinary gnoseological value, because it is precisely the alchemy that enables us to reveal the most recondite secrets of nature. Vigenère finds the alchemist theory of elements and constitutive principles of all things in the Kabbalah. In the first place, as is said in the essay on codes, that is figures, the quadruple nature of the basic constructive elements is reflected in the divine tetragram. Quote, the primary foundations of things are designated by the four letters of the great and inexpressible name, which constitute the four elements, end quote. It should be stressed, too, that Vigenère doesn't find most of his alchemist principles only in the Kabbalah, but that he detects them also in the classical mythology. As a result, his works represent an important stage in the history of the alchemist hermeneutics of the classical myths. Thus, for the sake of argument, analyzing the theme of the picture portraying the birth of Athena, Vigenère explains to the readers that the colors of the clothing of Athena, tritogenia, that are gold, porphyr, and azure, denote three so-called great elements, salt, mercury, and sulfur, but at the same time also three of the Paracelsus's formal principles. These three principles, furthermore, Vigenère argues, were denoted already by Orpheus as Typho, Cerberus, and Chimera, or as Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. Among other elements, the salt occupies the main place, inasmuch as it represents the principle of fertilization, because the salt, according to Vigenère, causes sensuality, that is lust, that he explains with the paretymology of the name of a wife of Neptune's, Salacia in Latin, as well as of the Latin word for lasciviousness, salacitas. The peculiarity of another Vigenère's original work, the treatise under the title On Prayers and Orations, lies in numerous references to the writings of Jewish mysticism, especially the Zohar, in addition to the adducing of the authorities of classical poets and the philosophers, such as Homer, Virgil, Ovid, Pythagoras, and Zoroaster. Here, Vigenère rejects the tripartite division of the spiritual life in cogitatio, meditatio, and contemplatio, speaking of which he demands the agent of prayer to be concentrated on the third level, contemplatio, where the intelligentsia resides. Thus, he does not take into consideration the entire soul, but only its peak, the place where the so-called appetitus superior is situated. As observed already by Fumaroli, according to Vigenère, the main property of any language is to express the essence of things. The question as in which language to pray God is irrelevant, since words in themselves do not mean anything, according to him. But he nevertheless gives precedence to Latin, regardless of the fact that a number of believers does not understand it. For all that, he gives a very curious explanation that people more believe in something that sounds strange and elevated than to something that is very close to them or worn out, so to say, by everyday usage. He's interested in allegorical, that is anagogical meaning of the words, so that passages from Homer are interpreted by him in the same manner as they were treated by the Neoplatonist Porphyries, inasmuch as the latter was especially important among the intellectual circles of the 16th century due to the introduction of the so-called Chaldaic oracles into the Neoplatonism. This kind of interpretation pleads for the aesthetics of abundance in the hermeneutical sense. Namely, it is necessary to offer the greatest possible number of references in order to create a peculiar net where the meaning is integrated and absorbed. It can be added that for Vigenère, the prayer enables a decipherment of a higher order that is the decipherment of the divine plan perceived in its entirety. There is no more a gap between visible and invisible, okay, but only the instituting of the circle of exchange. In that way, the community comes to being. For united in front of the face of God, man can keep the same spirit and remove every trace of disorder. The person who prays should be included into the net of concordances so as to contribute to the realization of the universal harmony. The prayer associates itself to something that could be termed a pious encyclopedism. The anagogical method of Vigenère's hermeneutics of the myths and the scriptures, interpreted according to the double scheme of alchemist and Kabbalistic reading, found its rhetorical expression in a hierarchy of styles and its aesthetical counterpart in the visual arts. Thus, it can be said that the rhetoric in Vigenère is the most important instrument of the symbolical image, be it biblical, mythological, or visual, since that peculiar kind of rhetoric binds together the sensory with the imagined, the material with the spiritual level. As to the spiritual level, images and the semantic pictures leave their polysemic line of thought in the reader's mind in order to form a certain rhetoric of silence as a prerequisite for the metanoia of deification, and that a man can reach through an inner prayer. This metanoia represents a counterpart to the Kabbalistic conversion of spirit, in Hebrew teshuva. It can also be seen that the esoteric and mystic paths are not the only ones that lead to the universality, but a large space is dedicated also to the missionary activity of the Jesuits. To that kind of aspirations corresponds an interest in all the languages of the world, testified by the presence of 56 types of alphabet graphically shown in his work on codes. Therefore, the essay on codes can be considered exactly as a reverberation of the literature about travels at that time in full swing. As an illustration, as an illustration for that, it can be reported a commentary on Chinese religion and script. It is told there that the Buddhist monks use a kind of the Kabbala and the routine of science by way of which they communicate without words, being subject to the obligation of silence resembling that of the Pythagoreans. We can also say that the main purpose of the author of the essay on codes was to bring back a regulated structure, till then concealed to the vast variety of languages and alphabets. The primary universality of Hebrew, the language of antiquity, disrupted by the Babylonian confusion, was to be rediscovered at another level. And finally, in other words, the linguistic research, like other secular sciences applied to the world of multiplicity, is able to bring man closer to the divine status thanks to the advancement of knowledge. We can clearly see then that, so to say, pact is being concluded between the education, the idea of progress, and the pious humanism. uniting themselves in an eschatological perception, simultaneously directing the human history and arranging its diversity. Therefore, we can say, finally, that the newly established request for rationality did not yet cause a rupture with the transcendental. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the informative talk, and I really enjoyed it. I was just wondering, because I don't know anything about the author you were. I even forgot his name. The author that you were talking about. But what I found very interesting is the emphasis on the meanings. So search for the meanings. So the knowledge relates to meanings, uncovering the meanings, and that leads to understanding. So that's the main theme, and it's not new theme. Up to the 17th century, people did search for the meanings in natural things, in human affairs, and that was somehow understanding of the world. But I was wondering whether you ran into anything like explanation of the phenomena, particular phenomena, while you were reading his texts, that he refers to, this explains this, instead of search for the meaning behind things, as an opposition.
Well, I didn't find some specific explanations of things. His main trend is to ascribe some meanings to some myths or texts and etc. Primarily classical myths, pagan myths, but also the scriptures, Christian scriptures. But it's always in a general way, by generalizing. Always trying to find some abstractions. Always. Only case when he does some concrete reasoning is in that practical things like military art.
What should we do on the battlefield?
Yes,
okay.
And in the rest, especially in the field of language and rhetoric, that's his primary aim is to reach the unity of the cosmos, the universal religion through diverse languages and alphabets and so on.
Yeah.
But nothing specific that I didn't read all the works through, but generally it's not he's not specific. Thank you.